This is John Ikonomidis, Professor in Chief, Cardiothoracic Surgery, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and you are listening to Interview with the Surgeon Agent.
On this episode of Interview with the Surgeon, we welcome Dr. John Ikonomidis, Chief of the Division of Cardiothoracic Surgery at UNC Chapel Hill. He was a faculty member at the Medical University of South Carolina from 2000 to 2017. In 2009, he was named Chief of MUSC's Division of Cardiothoracic Surgery and Program Director for its Cardiothoracic Surgery Residency program. In 2010, he was named Co-Director of the MUSC Center for Heart Valve Disease, and in 2011, he became Co-Director of the MUSC Heart and Vascular Service Line. His clinical interests include thoracic, aortic surgery, heart transplantation, and mechanical surgical support and valve surgery. Dr. Ikonomidis has been a National Institutes of Health funded surgeon scientist since 2001, and he has served as a co-investigator on several VA Merit Awards. He's an author of more than 150 articles published in medical journals. He is a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada, the American College of Surgeons, the American Heart Association, and the American College of Cardiology. He chairs the Society of Thoracic Surgeons Workforce on Cardiac Surgery, as well as the Joint Council for Thoracic Surgical Education's integrated 6-year Cardiothoracic Surgery Program Analyst Committee. He serves on the editorial boards of the Journal of Heart Valve Disease, the Journal of Cardiac Surgery, Circulation, Aorta, and the Journal of American Heart Association, and is an associate editor of the Journal of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining Interview with the Surgeon. Today we have Dr. John Ikonomidis, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at UNC Chapel Hill. Doc, how are we doing today?
We're doing very well. Thanks for the opportunity to participate.
Thanks for being with us. So let's just jump right into it. What were your goals and aspirations during your residency, and how did those change during your fellowship?
I did 2 residencies. There's some controversy about what a residency and a fellowship is, but some people refer to cardiothoracic surgical training after general surgery as a fellowship, but in actuality of fact, it's also a residency because you have to write a board exam. But throughout the years, I've heard people talking about the CT fellow. It's really the CT resident. But the point was I did 2 residencies. I did a general surgery residency in Canada, and then I did a cardiothoracic surgical residency in the United States. And so when I was a general surgery resident, my goal was to do the best to acquire the most surgical knowledge that I could during that time period, and to understand as much as possible how the human body works, the various types of surgery, the various types of conditions, so that I had a broad knowledge base that would help me when I then pursued my chosen specialty, which was cardiothoracic surgery. And also at this time, I had spent 3.5 years in the lab doing a doctorate in physiology of the heart. So from a very early time, I was interested in an academic job and an academic career. I spent all of my summers in medical school in labs working on the heart again and various parts of various aspects of cardiac research. So this was sort of an integral part of what I was doing when I was a general surgery resident. The other goal that I had at that time was to find the best residency training program possible. And I had concluded at that time that I wanted to train in the United States, and that I concluded that I wanted to train at Stanford because I knew some people there that I respected and admired and would like to be trained by, and also they specialized in things that I was interested in, most notably aortic surgery, which was sort of my area of interest. I made it a point whenever I went to national meetings to try and hunt those people down and speak with them, share with them my accomplishments to date. And I tried to focus my publications and so forth on cardiac surgery and related pursuits to make myself as attractive as possible to them, because the program I was interested in was Stanford, which is a very hotly contested program, and I was applying from Canada, not from the United States, so I'd be competing with all the American residents who were also interested in going there. So it was a daunting task, and I can't even begin to tell you the elation that I felt the day that I got the match letter that said that I'd been matched to Stanford, because that was a really, really big deal. It was a big deal for me, and it was a defining point in my career, without question, was getting that residency position there. When I was there, again, it was about learning aortic surgery, becoming a student of cardiac surgery as much as possible, delving into the history, understanding where we've been, because you can't really go anywhere before you understand where you've been, because you don't want to make the same mistakes that your predecessors made. And I will say, the residents that I train today don't have a complete appreciation of that. And they often come to me with research project ideas. And I say to them, I'm listening to your idea and it's a good one, but unfortunately it's been done many times. And one of the exercises when you're considering a new project and asking a new question is to do your due diligence to make sure that that question has not already been asked and answered. And unfortunately yours has many times. So your contribution to the literature will not really be very valuable because we know quite a bit about it already. So the point is, delve into the history. And I enjoyed very much delving into the history. I used to give presentations on the history of coronary bypass surgery, history of aortic surgery, history of transplantation. And these sorts of things help a lot when you move forward with your career and you know where you've been, so you know where you're going. So it was just trying to become the best cardiac surgeon that I could. I stayed on the academic side, publishing as much as I could. And then it was just a question of looking for a job at that point and trying to find one which suited my needs the best, which was a desire for a busy cardiac surgical practice with an emphasis on aortic surgery, and hopefully have the opportunity to start a basic science laboratory and study some of the things that I wanted to study. That's what I was looking for.
So what was that mentality for you? As you got done, you were looking for the job and your first really search from the transition from a student now to a professional, and how that perspective changed in the early years of your career?
Very strange thing because, I honestly didn't know if I had what it took. I will tell you that, in academic surgery, you stop operating on the so-called right side of the table where the surgeon operates and you move to the left, and you let a resident or a trainee stand on the right side of the table and do the case, and you teach them. And I didn't know, if I was going to be able to handle a clinical practice myself, let alone entrust that to somebody else. And very fortunately for me, when I did start in practice, it didn't take long to realize that I was actually, shockingly, and I don't know why, again, honestly, Matthew, I can't tell you why, I was just really comfortable with the job. I was comfortable with the environment. I was comfortable doing it. And I was comfortable to the point that I felt comfortable moving over to the right side. And I'll tell you something that academic surgeons will all tell you: the day that they move over to the right side, things look very different, because you're used to seeing the anatomy from a certain perspective, and now it's rotated 180 degrees and it looks different, and it's a little bit uncomfortable for the first little while. And that was not lost on me. It was an uncomfortable experience at first. And now I'm at the point that I'd rather do operations from the left side of the table than the right, interestingly, because that's where I spend most of my time. For example, today, I didn't have a resident to do a rather complicated case with me. There were 2 complicated cases on the schedule, and the resident chose to go with the other. And so I was operating on the right side, and it's a different experience, and it's not one that I do a lot these days. So I don't honestly know. I don't know how to speak to that transition very well, because the clinical transition was easy for whatever reason. Basic science transition to an independent researcher was also easy, and the reason for that, in retrospect, was because I just chose a good job. So it just so happened that a job fell in my lap. When I was looking for jobs in 1999 and the beginning of 2000, the job market was poor. It was very poor. Jobs were scarce. There wasn't a lot available. The jobs that I was looking at the time were just not acceptable jobs, and it was quite frustrating and quite worrisome to me. I did come to one center back in Canada that met most of my needs, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted, because I'd be operating in one place and then I'd have to travel across town to do my lab in another place. And I wasn't completely happy with it, but it was the best that was available. And at that time, I really was sort of thinking that I'd want to go back to Canada. I didn't come to the States with the intention of staying in the States at the time, but I was open for whatever, because I'd be board certified on both sides of the border. And then I want to say maybe around March, April of that year, and the academic year stops at the end of June, not January. So our year starts July 1st, not January 1st, from the standpoint of making changes, ends of residency training and that sort of thing. So I didn't have a lot of time left. And this job comes up, and it may have been a little earlier than that, maybe March, I'm not sure. This job came up in Charleston, and went down and looked at it. I actually knew the basic scientist that had the lab there, and I was in many respects, I was more excited about that than the job itself. But the job was a good one because they needed a surgeon. They weren't inventing a job. There was a surgeon that was leaving and the other surgeons were overworked. So they needed somebody, which meant I'd be busy right away. Plus, nobody liked doing aortic surgery there. So I had a niche that I could immediately come into and develop with no competition. So clinical niche with no competition. The surgeons there were not using the lab in any way, shape, or form, which I thought was a bit of a travesty for an academic program. And I knew the director of the lab, and we got off to a terrific relationship right at the start. And so all of the transitions there happened really quickly and very smoothly, actually, shockingly so.
Really interesting journey there to get to where you are. Now, let's just think back too as well. What would you say were some of the keys to your success during your early career, and how did that help you get to the top of the industry?
Mentorship, in some respects, was important. So I had a research mentor that was. I had a couple of research mentors that were very important. My mentor, Dick Weisel, who was my PhD supervisor, was, in my opinion, the consummate academic surgeon. At the time, we didn't have a complete handle on how to arrest the heart for heart surgery. You put a patient on bypass, and the heart is still beating, and you have to stop the heart with a chemical solution to keep it protected so that you can operate on it. And we didn't really understand the parameters of that, to the optimal extent. And Dr. Weisel's primary focus was working that out, was working out what the optimal measures of cardioplegia, arresting the heart, were. And I came into the laboratory right in the thick of that. And so spent a lot of time doing clinical work in the operating room, measuring, testing. And my predecessors and my successors came up with a series of manuscripts which really defined optimal strategies for protecting the heart. And it was a really exciting time because it was truly you got the bug for research because you're at the forefront of this investigation. You knew that it was clinically relevant and it was going to help people. And it was exciting and it was fast paced and it was terrific, and really learned the value of research and the fun of research. And that was something that I sort of never lost. I've had a number of clinical mentors over the years. Probably my two most important were two heart surgeons at Stanford, Craig Miller and Scott Mitchell. Craig Miller they were both cardiac and vascular surgeons, and they both did terrific cardiac surgery and vascular surgery. And they were both incredible role models for me in terms of how to conduct that kind of career, which is what I wanted. And so I was fortunate and prepared from the clinical point of view when I got to Charleston. The research side, that's when I had Frank Spinelli, who was the director of the CT lab at the time, and just a powerhouse in terms of his ability to write grants, get grants funded, get studies done. He asked great questions. He was very focused, extremely task-oriented. A lot of really great qualities that I think some of which rubbed off on me. A lot of his style rubbed off on me in terms of how to write, how to prepare grants, that sort of thing. And so, I had some sort of good people in my camp, without question.
As chief of the program, what type of advice do you give to the graduating residents or fellows as they're entering the job market for the first time?
The first question is, what do you really want to do? What makes you happy? That's important. Cardiac surgery, cardiothoracic surgery is a varied enough specialty that you can choose. Residents come into the program, but some of them gravitate towards the general thoracic side. Some of them gravitate towards the cardiac side. Some of them actually like the entire spectrum and want to do all of it. Those that want to do all of it are sort of shunted into a private practice career, because that generally doesn't happen in academics. You're either an academic thoracic surgeon or an academic cardiac surgeon, with relatively few exceptions. But on the clinical side, not only can you do academic thoracic surgery, but you'll often develop a niche where you basically spend your career doing a particular kind of disease process, whether it be esophageal cancer or lung cancer or benign esophageal disease. Or on the cardiac side, you could be a heart failure surgeon, you could be an arrhythmia surgeon, you could be a valve surgeon, you could be a coronary surgeon. And you can devote your career to that aspect and take it as far as you can in terms of developing minimally invasive techniques and that sort of thing. And so my advice is to really figure out what it is you like, figure out what it is that would make you happy and what you could see yourself devoting your life to, and pursue that. And then my next recommendation is that if you're interested in research, to do research which is consistent with your clinical practice, because then you will generate clinical questions that you want to answer, that matter. Because a lot of times when you do research, it comes at the end of the day, nights, weekends, when you quite frankly would rather not be doing it, when you'd rather be doing something else. So at the very least, unless you have, amazing time management skills that you can fit all of this into a 10 or 12 hour day, but most people cannot, and you end up bringing homework home or working on a Saturday or a Sunday, that sort of thing. And if you're doing that, it really needs to be something that you enjoy, because it's going to be hard enough to do that when you have pressures outside of the hospital to be doing something else.
Something that's been coming up lately with a lot of my clients is that the lack of annual conferences, everything's kind of done over Zoom now. It's all virtual. What type of things are you telling the next generation of young surgeons as far as how can they mingle with folks like yourself? How can they connect? When they used to be able to do it in person, now they have to get a little more creative ways in the outreach process.
We have just started the whole virtual communication thing. The Society of Thoracic Surgeons meeting was just flat out not held this year. The AATS, the American Association for Thoracic Surgery, which is our other major society, those are the two majors, they had a virtual meeting, but it was not a complete meeting. They pared it down and limited it to mostly abstract presentations. In other words, the papers that got on the meeting. The STS and the AATS is usually a mix of original research and then expert sessions that experts will tell you for 3 hours on how to operate on the mitral valve, and they'll show different approaches and how they do it and what the results are and that sort of thing. So those latter talks tended to not be given. I was scheduled to give 2 at this year's AATS, for example, and I gave neither of them. But the original research papers went on, and then they had the usual papers like the presidential address and that, and so forth, the ones that sort of need to happen. But we've just started this, so it's difficult at this point to give advice to residents on how they're going to be able to create those connections, because we're just at the beginning in terms of to what extent the virtual communication universe is going to develop. And I think that it will develop significantly over time. And I find that my residents are so incredibly tech savvy, and they're using every media stream and every media mechanism known. I use none of it. I'm just not a media guy. I stay very neutral. I don't have a Facebook account. I don't have a Twitter account. I haven't found it to be necessary. I still communicate through email and so forth, and that's perfectly sufficient for me. But these guys do all of it. Snapchat, TikTok, whatever the heck that is. I really don't know what these things are, honestly, but I hear about them from my son. They're good at it. And they communicate a lot, and they communicate with their colleagues. They know the other individuals that are training elsewhere. They keep in touch. They meet. They were meeting on the interview trail. They've exchanged email addresses and whatever else, and they keep in touch. And they say, so what stage of training are you at? How many cases have you done? What are they letting you do? What are they not letting you do? What are your challenges? What are your successes? They know these things. They know each other very well. And they don't even see each other very much, but they know a lot about what's happening with residency training across the country, because they're all communicating. I had none of that when I was a resident. We had an email address. We used it sparingly. The written letter was still a really important form of communication. Not so much anymore. It's the evolution of communication options has been rapid and impressive, and I think these guys will figure it out. I think they'll be able to figure it out. I really do.
Can you also touch on your involvement with the Society of Thoracic Surgeons and also the editorial journals that you're a part of?
So one of the pieces of advice that I was given very early on is, and it's a piece of advice that I'm happy to give to anybody interested in being involved in societies, is what I like to refer to as crashing the party. Don't sit and wait for people to invite you. Invite yourself. And the way you do that is again, you decide what you want to do. So I wanted to do reviews for journals, because I thought that an important priority for me would be to get on editorial boards, maybe serve in an editorship role one day. And so I wanted to get started early. So at the meetings, I knew who the editors of the journals were. I found them. One of them might be giving a talk at a meeting. And so I went, attended the talk, and then afterwards curbside them, introduced myself, gave them my card, said this is what I was interested in. And they sent me reviews. And the follow-up to what I'm about to say is that academics is not like baseball. In baseball, you get 3 swings at the ball before you're out. But in academics, you get 1 swing at the ball. It's okay to say no. If somebody asks you to do a project and you say, I'm sorry, I simply don't have time, that's okay. But when you commit to something, you have to do it. And not only do you have to do it, but the amount of time and the amount of effort that you spend in it will likely gauge whether or not you'll be given more to do or promoted in the process. And more and more people are interested in academic surgery and are interested in advancing themselves in these societies, and so it's competitive. So you have to develop a plan. You have to speak to the important people, try and get on some rosters, ask your senior mentors where you are to recommend you, because they probably are doing some of those things. So they're in a position where they could recommend you, and then just work really hard at it. And things come just one bit at a time. Devote yourself to it and get things done quickly. I developed a reputation early on in my career as the guy who was most likely to get the job done first. I had an administrative member of the ATS say to me once, that something like when they sent out a job to 20 people to do, they all felt that it was likely that I would be turning it in first, and they expected to see that, because that's what and so it made them want to involve me in things. And so if you can develop that kind of reputation as somebody who gets things done quickly and gets things done well, they'll involve you. I just came off as chair of the Adult Cardiac Surgery Task Force. I did that for about 6 years.
Okay.
And then prior to that, I was chair of it used to be called the TSFRE, now it's called the Thoracic Research Foundation, but I ran the research side of it for about 6 years. So I did a lot of this stuff. And I currently oversee the task force that does the every 5-year survey of the workforce. And we ask questions to figure out what surgeons are doing, what their challenges are. And we ask questions, the answers to which hopefully will help the STS plan their next steps in terms of things they need to do to advance the field. Now, and having been an academic surgeon for 20 years, I'm as excited about it now as I was on day one. Mm-hmm. I truly am. I love my job. I love what I do. And I have a fairly similar amount of energy that I did back in the day. So, and the reason for that, I think, is just because I believe I've chosen a career that just works for me and that I really love.
Sure. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Interview with the Surgeon. Until next time, stay focused and keep following your dreams.